take two on slate.
It's funny you mentioned The Exorcist because I was at Warner Brothers when we did the director's cut, and Blatty and Friedkin would fight in the screening room. We just covered this with some of the execs that were there at the time. They would just fight about what goes in and what comes out, because every cut, director's cut or other, is another paycheck for those involved, right? So we thought this was more of a Blatty's cut because he was the one pushing for it. He needed the money a little bit more than Friedkin did, or wanted the money more. But The Exorcist definitely was
Friedkin used to work
entertaining movie.
I'm sorry, I cut you off again.
No, Friedkin what?
Friedkin used to work down the hall from me at Paramount. He was married to Sherry Lansing, who ran the studio when he was directing a movie there, and he just passed away. So I want to, he's a great director. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's done some great work, and he was doing. I don't even remember what he was doing down the hall, but I know what it sounded like, and it sounded like the end of the world. He was screaming and yelling, and it was horrifying. Like my editors, I don't remember what I was doing. It's probably that HBO movie, Weapons of Mass Distraction. But anyway, at any rate, all of my assistant editors were horrified. And I used to threaten them that if they didn't butch up, I would send them down the hallway to have to work with William Friedkin. And that used to horrify them because he sounded scary. But I'm going to say, I would have worked with him in a heartbeat because he's a great filmmaker. This is a guy who's done a lot of fantastic work.
Yeah, he had 3 real strong showings right out of the gate, right? It was French Connection, Exorcist, and then I still think Sorcerer, even though it wasn't really a much appreciated film at the time. I think that movie moves from scene to scene so well. Just the whole, I know it's a remake.
But it's craft-wise, it's muscular, as they say. It's a very crafty movie. I sort of on the other side of the fence with that one, compared to The Exorcist or The French Connection.
Yeah. But I remember The French Connection just seemed so unreal and raw at the time. Even later, decades later, it was still one of those grit-filled movies. And they're in it, right? Popeye Doyle plays a part in it, and so does his partner, Cloudy. In fact, at one point, they're the ones that they're giving him the shit because he's the police captain, and they're telling him, fuck you don't know your job and you're gutless, and they're all shouting that at Popeye Doyle, and there's some what a group of great stunt drivers on that too, from the 7-Ups and from some of the Bullet, those guys that came from Bullet to actually execute that chase. And it's interesting because when Friedkin retells a lot of the production of that, the line between myth and reality gets severely blurred for the purposes of the story. And he says things that those of us who worked at Warner Brothers know aren't true, but are really good for the movie he's talking about. You know what I mean? And, and so the protocol around him was don't let him around any sugar, because he would just short circuit and go completely berserk. It was like flipping a switch on him. So maybe on those days, if it was every day, I apologize, but maybe on those days, he was having one donut too many, and just short circuiting on the.
Well, there is rumors that he had some chemical imbalances, but whatever they were, they certainly contributed to a master of cinema. However, so the highs must have been great because they really looked amazing.
There were. There's things about The Exorcist too that I really like. One is that it's grounded in reality. There's that moment where she goes to the priest and she's like, I need an exorcism. And he's like, we don't do that. And she's like, why? He's like, because we know about things like psychology and medicine. And he kind of tries to take her off base as her last hope. And I just thought that was such an effective way to play it, because now, the angle's a very different one with this topic, as we've seen hundreds of Exorcist movies. And The Exorcist is based on what was the Doe case, right? Which I think ultimately did play out to be a sort of a psychiatric event. But it's interesting that they made the priests seem very businesslike and real. And they were all the technical advisors on the film, but they even have a meeting. Who do we get? And they're in the headquarters. They're in the Catholic Church headquarters, right? And he's like, well, who do we even get to do an exorcism? Do we know anyone? Remember that? And they have one guy that's considered the black sheep out in Iraq. And they go, well, we got this guy. And they're like, wait, let me check my Rolodex. Is this guy even still alive? Can we get him? Like, it's almost like they want to put on a circus act for the purposes of the family. And then, of course, he becomes the real deal that is the savior of the piece. And also, what an incredible way to shoot someone's entrance into a house from the street where you just see him looking up at it in the shadow to him in the door.
I don't know how that shot. I mean, people say that, images don't mean, anything in film. It's like spectacular. It tells the story is completely told in that. And the lonely little guy with his briefcase, afraid, but he's going to march forward anyway. Like, it's just amazing. Just amazing. And then he goes inside and he starts to do his little thing, follow his little protocols. And next thing you know, he's like, we see it point of view story. Like, we see the story through his point of view suddenly. Like, suddenly we're following him in, and we're disbelieving. We're not sure if we buy anything, and then but we see what he sees through his eyes, so we believe it, And this is the master. It was amazing the way he did that. Just great, and boy, was it. You talk about reality. Oh yeah, it scared me, man. It was so close to real that I started wondering, could this be? Well, I still am not sure. I really don't want to find out.
I tried to get Owen Royceman out of retirement when I was at Warner Brothers, and one of the things he said about The Exorcist is that the greatest effect in the movie was getting the scenic paint department to spot the wires, which is when you go black, white, black, white, black, white. So with the shadow configuration he had mapped out, you can't really see them. He said that was the greatest trick because of the way the set was built. And there's that scene where you would do a lot of that with a rig now, but they had to build a seat for him to sit in where the grips would pull him up the stairs, pull the cameraman up the stairs, and so she could run, the actress could run at they had to rig a lot of that for really sort of first time revolutionary use. But he said the greatest thing we did was spot the wires, because there's so much of that. And the moment you see a single wire, you're out of the movie. Mentally, you're gone.
People don't realize it nowadays. You see, there is a basic CG budget line for wire removal, rig removal.
Yeah.
And that just comes with the price of admission. You pay that just to pull the wires off. And then they didn't have that.
No, it's funny. There was it was a complete, obviously it was a completely different time, but just the fact that they had to solve that right there that day with the craftsmen on hand. And I mean, another obstacle they ran into was when they tried to do the reverse head and there was no breath, and they didn't realize that until actually they got the first shot. And they said, wait, there's something missing that totally makes this look like a doll out of the Twilight Zone. And that's there's no exhaust coming out of this thing's mouth. So they had to actually wire it up. These basic things that you would
they built that. They had to build that set. I understand. I don't know if this is true, but in a refrigeration unit.
Yeah.
So they could get the breath coming out of it. Nowadays, again, CG, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, CG. I mean, you can't run an air conditioning to the point where you can see breath because it dehumidifies the air. So you have to put them in a cooling unit. And the problem is, though, when you do that, is when you get enough bodies in the cooling unit, the temperature rises.
Lights.
So then you got to call it cut, move everyone out, and let the temperature drop back down. And now hopefully your AD has like a secondary location mapped out where you can step outside and shoot something on the street while that's cooling down. But those are the days, though, and I think that decade where they didn't really worry about those costs and overages. They're just like, whatever, go as long as you need to go to get the movie.
Oh, I think they were money has always been valuable to people, but the studio heads, they weren't tech. They were not tech companies. They were filmmakers, the legacy.